Welcome, Kristie Goshow is the Chief Marketing Officer for Preferred Hotels. So thank you for being here. Start by telling us a little bit about yourself and your career path to your current role.
Oh, goodness, career path. So 20 years now, sort of pushed into maybe 1 minute. So let me give that a good go. So I'm just going to start by just pointing out what these three words next to me mean that you can see here on screen, because I think this underscores everything that I am, but more importantly, everything that I believe our industry is, which basically means this has always been my passion. Travel has been my passion since I was a very small girl. And at Preferred, we believe in travel because we believe travel makes people better. And I think I've certainly felt that I've lived that throughout the course of my career. So it sort of goes all the way back to when I was just 17, a young girl, and I took my first job in corporate business travel. And I suppose that was
you're originally from Arkansas or Kentucky?
How did you know? How did you know? Yes, originally, actually, I was born in Holland. I grew up in Wales and in Reading, UK. And spent most of my formative years in the UK. And that was where I started my travel journey, actually, Joe. So good pickup. and that gave me my taste. I actually did attend one of the first ever courses in the UK at college for travel, and then went on to study at university. And what was interesting about that was at the time, everybody said it was a flaky course. And I think, travel has really been working over the years to find its place at the table with other business degrees. So I feel very privileged that I was able to come in early days and be, if you like, part of the movement that strengthened even the academic side of our industry to make sure that we have the right people in the right places to drive us forward. Anyway, so upon graduation, because I specialized in integrated transport management, I decided to go to the aviation side. So I spent a little bit of time on the cargo side, and from there went into the passenger side of things with Virgin Atlantic Airways. And my first roles were actually in loyalty and sales. But I say first roles, I have to admit that prior to that, I was cabin crew. And I loved my time flying the skies. And I always believed that it helps us if we walk a mile in the customer's shoes.
Absolutely.
And I can say that it prepared me in ways that, I still today I'm very grateful for, because once you've seen every aspect of that experience as the consumer who sits in the seat for 10 hours, then when you go in to talk about and sell that to a travel agent or to a corporation, or even design a corporate business program, you're far better placed to pick the right words, to focus on the right outputs and benefits. So time well spent there. And then once I sort of got my feet under the table at the airline, I started to pay a bit more attention to what was going on in the world. And this is actually an important point. In fact, everything I'm going to describe to you, Joe, was very deliberate. I know a lot of people sort of may say that opportunities present themselves. I've always been the type of person who tries to see what's next. And then I decide, is that the direction I want to go in? And do I need to pivot? How do I pivot to get there? So in the late 90s, as I was sitting there talking to travel agents about business class airline seats, I noticed that the internet was starting to have quite a significant impact on our industry, specifically on the lodging side. And I was sort of drawn to what Expedia at that time were doing, and a company that, back then we would know as Travelocity.
Right.
And they were really starting to penetrate the lodging side, and the hoteliers weren't ready for this. Many of them didn't even have their own websites. So I ended up transitioning and moving over to the lodging side of the industry, and I joined a company called UTEL and Pegasus, which were two entities combined at that point in time. And that was where I got my schooling in distribution. And I was then able to build out my expertise in digital, all the different distribution channels. We built out some of the industry's first affiliate programs. And it was an excellent grounding that then set me up for the next move that I made, which was actually to Dubai, where I joined a luxury hospitality group called Jumeirah. And there I was responsible for their distribution, their call centers, their digital side of things. And each one of these moves, as you probably started to notice, is acting a bit like a building block.
Yeah.
And those building blocks were almost designed as large company, small company, large company, small company. Because when you're in a large company, you're very narrow in your role, but you can go deep and you have the opportunity to explore a little bit more. When you then move to a smaller company, you might wear 2 or 3 different hats. So shallow, but broad. And I think that, you know, if you think about your skill sets and your learning through your career, you're then able to apply, learn more, build, and as you go narrow and deep,
Absolutely.
Start to flex the muscles of your career and your brain. And then I just stayed from that point onwards. I stayed in luxury lodging and hospitality, both with Viceroy and now with Preferred Hotels.
But I think that's an interesting path, that you had a passion for travel and you knew that travel was going to be whatever your career path would take you, travel would be a part of it.
Yeah.
And you started kind of on the loyalty side of things. And then it sounds like you started building marketing skills as you went, focused on marketing and sort of rounded out your portfolio of skills as you went.
Yeah, good. I've really worked across all different disciplines. So I have done loyalty, I have worked in sales, I have been frontline, out on the road, I've driven many miles, calling on people who sometimes didn't even want to see me.
Right.
And doing my best to try and drive the top line. Spent a little bit of time on revenue management and then, of course, on the digital strategy side of things. So really, all of those disciplines set me up very well to strengthen my true passion, which is branding and marketing. And I'm going to add on that the point of marketing, because I use that word and I wish we didn't have that word. I wish we could find a good alternative to it, because I think it's very misunderstood. So there's a famous sort of thought leader in marketing, Sergio Sigman, I think his name might be, Sergio Simon. He has a very famous statement that's often quoted, and it's the sole purpose of marketing is to sell, and it's to sell at the right price to as many people as possible. And if we think of marketing through those words, we'll actually see it as really no different to a salesperson or to the individual who's responsible for driving revenue. So ultimately, a marketer is one of the most commercial individuals in an organization. And the word itself is attached to, I think, a slightly different definition.
Yeah, and I think that speaks to the idea that marketing is not a cost center, but it's a value driver. It's a driver for the organization in terms of growth and success. It's not a cost center. And that I think makes you much more indispensable to the organization than if you're, marketing is sometimes viewed as an expense, and it shouldn't be.
Right. Do you think that it's seen that way because typically enjoys having some of the largest budgets in the company so that it can do the things that it needs to do? Or, yeah. I mean, what's sort of driven that over the years?
I think that the other parts of every organization look at that marketing spend as the biggest line item and the easiest to cut or trim, when the reality is cut and trim that line item and it's cutting off your growth engine.
Yeah, I would agree with that. A little easier, well, a whole lot easier to report, of course, and measure these days, which wasn't the case, 20 years ago. Yeah. And I think that's a big part of it. Now we have, a depth of analytical rigor in what we do on the marketing or the commercial marketing side of things.
And to that point, I think the digital transformation has accelerated that, because digital is much easier to measure than analog, just generally.
Yes, yeah.
Okay, so this brings me to my second question, which is sort of what advice do you wish you'd gotten very early in your career that you maybe would give others that are just beginning that journey?
Gosh. Yeah, I think about my career and I feel very happy with the path I've walked down. But if there was one piece of advice, it would probably be to be confident in your worth. Because I haven't regretted any of the decisions that I've made in terms of the steps and the turns that I've taken, but maybe I should have had more confidence when I was negotiating into those roles, or while in those roles. Part of that just comes with experience and maturity of years.
Yes.
But it's also, I think, comes from the environment that we grow up into, and over time, you know, things do change. That every single one of us needs to know that if we are in a position, it's because the people who put us there saw something in us, a spark, something of a great opportunity, and that we should be confident in that and build on that and be prepared to ask for what we think we are worth.
Yep. Well, to your point, they saw something in you to give you that position that you may not have even seen in yourself.
Very good point. That's right. That's absolutely right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
And I suppose the other piece of it, thing I would say is I learned over the years that there's a saying, dress for the job you want, not for the job you have.
Right.
And take it very literally. Yes, you know, we all need to think about how we present ourselves, but actually it's more about the mindset. And it's amazing over the years how many people I have since spoken to who say to me, oh, I don't think I'm ready for that position, because they see it as such a stretch.
Right.
And I wish somebody had said to me maybe 20 years ago, don't worry about the stretch, because you've got long legs. You literally, you have to believe yourself into that position. And I think maybe I would have taken some bolder moves, perhaps. Maybe I would have jumped a bit further and a bit quicker.
Great.
But that doesn't change where I am today, and I'm still very happy with the path I've taken.
I think we all, in some ways, for me at least, I appreciate even the bad experiences, because those are the ones that I learned from and grew from the most.
Yes.
So, okay. So tell me about what your superpower. Do you have a superpower? And if so, what is it?
So when I answer this question, I have to ask myself, how would other people describe me? I would say that they probably use the term, I have an ability to see what's not visible and to hear what's not said.
Wow.
And that allows me to identify opportunities. Oftentimes we identify those opportunities before others have, and that does give us a leg up, particularly in business. But it comes from a curiosity, and a very natural curiosity. And I tend to look at the world around me and cross-pollinate all the time. And I started doing this about 15 years ago when I read a very interesting book. Actually, I think maybe it was 10 years ago, called The Alchemy of Change. And there was a gentleman in McKinsey, and he started looking at the best of industries and techniques and saying what would happen if you took what you do in pharma and applied it to a hotel bedroom. You wouldn't obviously think to do right. that, to cross-pollinate like that. But if you actually apply that to your everyday mindset, you start to realize how innovation and opportunity is everywhere. Hence, seeing what's not necessarily visible and hearing what's not always said. It's that listening between the lines for opportunity. That I think definitely is one of my superpowers.
That may be the first time I've asked that question and the person answered with an actual superpower, like superhuman hearing and being able to see things that aren't even there. Those are actual superpowers. So I appreciate it.
I should qualify that, Jen, say I am very much addicted to Flash at the moment. I'm big into Marvel. So perhaps I embellish that a little bit with my own dreams and ambitions. But in my mind, I need a cape.
Great.
One day.
Okay, so I'm going to transition to just a little bit about your role. What's the biggest challenge that you face today in your current role? We talked a little bit about, how does marketing as a whole show their value to the rest of the organization or the rest of the world? But tell me about, are there some challenges that you face in your current role that you know?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'd be silly if I said there were none. But first and foremost, think about where we are mid-pandemic. I think challenge number one for me is, how do I understand the psyche or the revised psyche of the consumers that I am trying to speak to? Okay, and that may change from place to place. And it might have been that we look at the world in terms of 4 regions. Now we have to look at the world at a far more granular level when we think about our marketing, of course. Very domestic, highly regionalized, and we're going down to a city level or a state level.
Yeah.
Where before we would think of the world as a country, perhaps as a discrete continent. And so that's challenge number one. And then challenge number two is how do I keep my team focused and excited about the opportunities ahead of us? Because right now, a lot of what we're seeing in the media and what we're hearing is the very unfortunate side of the side effects of the pandemic, and those are very pronounced for our industry, of course, in travel and hospitality. But at the same time, as I pointed out earlier when we were talking about superpowers, there's innovation and a silver lining to it, because when we are forced into the corner is when we are at our most creative. We will dig deep and find solutions. And it's my job to make sure that myself and our team are always asking why, what if, and really questioning everything we do. And we've literally removed from our vernacular now previously, or this is how we do things, because what we did 6 months ago and perhaps have been doing those things for the last, maybe we've been doing those for the last 3 years, that's irrelevant. Absolutely irrelevant at this point in time. So it's those two probably the key challenges.
So it must be thrilling to work for a 5-month-old startup with the resources of a company with history, right?
That's great. Yes, absolutely. A 50-year-old business that has endured, I might add, many changes in the macroeconomic environment.
Oh yeah.
And has continued to thrive because, in each case, has reinvented itself.
I love it.
Yeah, I feel very confident that we are on track to do the same again.
So where do you, or maybe even your team, find inspiration? You know, is it from within the travel industry, or is it outside, or where do you go for inspiration for either yourself or for them?
It's actually both. It's both, and over the last 6 months, we've become much tighter as a team, and I'm sure that we would hear that echoed by many leaders and many businesses across all industries, because of the need to keep the connection, to help each other deal with the changes that they've gone. I think the new communication tools that we've all been forced to use and use more deeply has helped us to understand each other a bit better. And in those conversations, we talk about not just what we're doing every day, but we talk about our families more, because we're actually at home having those conversations with our work colleagues. So we can't have that same divide between home space and workspace. They blur, which means they come into the conversation more frequently. And we have to acknowledge that our families are a very, very important part of our lives, and they do inspire what we do every day. I mean, why we get out of bed every day for many, many people. So I think having the ability to learn more about each other has helped to inspire the team to focus, to maintain their excitement, and to say that my glass is half full. There's still opportunity, much opportunity ahead of us. So that conversation, far more regular connection with each other, allowing those conversations to go in places they wouldn't normally go, allowing for the personal to bleed into the corporate. And honestly, I think giving people the time they need to maybe go off and do other things. So building time for headspace. Maybe that's gardening. Maybe that's just taking more exercise around the block, and looking at the world around us. All of those things inspire us, even in the workspace.
I love that. I recently came across a company, and their tagline was something like, "All business is personal," which I kind of like, because the reality is we bring ourselves to our work, but we don't forget the things that make us who we are when we leave to go to work. And it sounds like you're acknowledging that in your team, and trying to get them to bring their whole selves to work so that they can give you the best they can give.
absolutely, and be happy doing so. And I've always believed that you invite people to come and work for you. But even now,
Yeah.
you can never assume people don't have a choice. We should always say that in the recruitment process, we are inviting people to come and work for us, and they choose to go to work each day. Because once you're an adult, there's nobody kicking you out of bed in the morning.
Right.
The only person that's going to get you up and doing what you need to do is yourself. So if we stay focused on those two messages, I think not only is it will bring a happier individual to work, but I think we stay focused on the fact that everyone has a choice. We're all here. You and I came on to talk today, not because we had to, because we chose to.
Right.
Anyway,
Well,
so there's lots of things I think we can do to continue to inspire ourselves and each other.
I love that. And that actually leads me to a good question, which is sort of what are the most important values that you demonstrate as a leader, or what are the values that you demand from your team?
I'm going to start with the importance of having a voice. So I encourage my team to have a voice, and that actually is easier said than done, because of course, you know, we've got members in our team who may be more confident than others, and you can have a voice in different ways. It doesn't have to be, you know, the person that speaks the most on the conference call,
right,
or is the loudest in the room, or the smartest person in the room. It's about providing platforms for individuals to have a voice. So empowerment, the right outlets, the right exposure for individuals in the team, so they can shine and be seen within a large organization. And then that allows them to have a voice. So for me, it's all about finding ways for my team to go ahead of me. And there's different leadership styles, Joe, we all know that. And my preference is leadership from behind, because I sort of watched way back, I think it was probably, that's very, very little, this concept of a shepherd and sheep, or cattle and a rancher. You often see them behind, you don't see them in front. And their role is to guide and cajole and keep everybody moving in the right direction to get where they need to be. So hopefully the values that my team see in me is to empower them, to provide opportunity, to give them a platform to enable their voice. I'd also add to that honesty and direct dialogue. I'm not their parent. Yeah. I'm there to provide frank and honest feedback to everybody and to myself, and I ask other people to do the same in return. And I do have members of my team who have over the years mentored me, and I think that, you know, that's a good way to keep yourself on track, and as a sense check over time. Sometimes you can miss things as a leader. You know, you're not every day sitting in the cubes listening to the water cooler conversations. So having the ability to develop direct conversation and be open to receive it in return, I think is very important.
To use your analogy of how a shepherd maybe herds the flock, or a rancher herds the cattle, and it's often from behind and not from the front, I wonder if that's because they're trying to push along the stragglers that are not going with the rest of the herd. And so I wonder how you do that, which is you talked about giving voice and allowing, you know, your team to have a voice. How do you encourage somebody who doesn't want to use their voice to use their voice?
Well, I think it comes down to understanding their motivations and their inner hopes, dreams, and desires as an individual. And that's just part of regular development conversation. You have to understand what they want to achieve in life, what does success look like to them, not what it looks like to me, right? As the CMO of the function. So in those conversations, they're going to reveal what truly motivates them. And I have examples of individuals in my team who are very much introverts. And it's not an easy place for them to be presenting to their peers or putting themselves out in the public eye. And I would never push anybody to do something they aren't comfortable with. But if in the conversation, their hopes, dreams, and desires reveal that they would like to be recognized as a thought leader in their subject matter, we'll then talk about different ways to go about doing that. And I think my role is to help them gently to ease into those activities that might not be as comfortable for them, but with a safety net around them. So by providing them with the direction and the support, making sure that when they first step out, that's a safe environment for them to do that in. And then the entire process is constructive. So yeah, it's ultimately comes down to, I think, a lot of listening between the lines again. And remember, people won't always tell you exactly what they want, just like consumers don't always know what they want.
Right.
We have to watch how people live their lives. We have to listen to their stories. That's why before, when we were talking about how we, in our calls, we talk about what happens in life as well as what happens in the office.
Right.
Those conversations will tell us an awful lot about perhaps what's going to motivate an individual and the best way to lead them and their preferred learning styles.
Yes.
So all of that has to be observed, and then you come up with a custom approach for each one of your team. So when you think about that block, to bring it back to that analogy of sheep, within a team, you're going to have the individuals that want to charge ahead and lead the path. And then you may have your so-called stragglers, but they're not really stragglers. They're individuals who might just need a bit of support, showing them the way,
right,
and reassurance as to why it works to stay part of the flock,
right,
and what they might be able to learn from the flock, and
to
give
point
back
about
to
inviting,
being a part of the flock.
Yeah, to your point about inviting them to come work for you, you can invite them to be part of the flock, and they may just need to be invited.
Correct. Yes. Yeah. Yes. Because we don't know people's past lives. We only know them as we find them from the interview forward. So, yeah.
Well, okay. So I want to shift gears. You know that at Setup, we live kind of between the space between marketing agencies and brands. So I'm just curious how you like to work with marketing agencies, at Preferred Hotels, and even maybe in your past life.
Yeah. We work with a number of agencies today, different parts of our business. We have an agency on the branding side. We have agencies that help us on our digital paid media. And we also have agency type services through a third party to support us on our loyalty efforts at Preferred. So how we like to work with them, I think it's no different to the way I've described our relationship as a team, to be very honest with you. It's about finding the right cultural fit. Let's start there, because the agency needs to feel right. There needs to be the appropriate player mapping, because my team is not the only set of stakeholders inside our organization. Right. We are a family-owned business, so it's very, very important for me to work with partners that understand family values, family ethics, and the role that plays in the dynamic of our business. It's also important that we work with partners who are very entrepreneurial and very flexible. So we tend to match up there first and foremost, Joe, and then we'll start to look at the financials and obviously the technical expertise. But you can have a great agency partner who ticks every single capability and skill set box, that comes in on budget. But if you can't communicate as human beings, and there isn't an appreciation at an emotional level with the brands, it's doomed to failure.
Yes.
So we start culture first, fit first, and then we move to look at capability sets and price points.
Yeah, in our business, we talk a lot about capability versus chemistry. I know we've had a conversation about that before, where capability is on paper, they tick all the boxes, to your point, and chemistry is the intangibles. Do they mesh well with my team? How are they how is their communication style? Does it match our communication style? All of those things that it's like when a new college graduate comes into the workforce, you tell them, yes, you need to learn hard skills like the technical skills you need to do your job, but you also need to learn the soft skills about how to interact with people in a positive way. And I think what I'm hearing is that you expect your agency partners to be technically competent to do the work, but also mesh well with your team.
Right. And to sort of share our passions, actually, because hopefully they look beyond the scope of whatever just the engagement is that was on paper. And they may also work with us to identify opportunities in other parts of the business that we never had imagined in that first engagement. And I have to say that some of the best agencies I've worked with have become very dear friends.
Mm-hmm.
And those relationships have sort of moved with me as I have gone and joined new organizations. And I suppose the best measure is, and I'm going to quote something that a member of my team had shared with me when I first came to Preferred, and I introduced an agency that I had been working with at Viceroy and previously when I was based in Dubai with Jumeirah. And we were on the phone talking about what we needed to do and achieve. And it was a very sort of open conversation. Yeah. And I finished the call and I turned to my colleague and said, so this is the first time you've met this agency and you've heard them speak. How would you describe them? What's your opinion? Just because, I need another set of ears and eyes, again, to keep me honest. And she responded by saying, they literally finished your sentences. In fact, you finished each other's sentences. Mm-hmm. And that was an aha moment. I thought, that's great, because that means they understand me, my hopes, dreams, desires, what success looks like for me. And that's a big part of the battle. It's helping people get to where you need to be mentally. And then, just generally, there's a relationship there that's as natural as a member of the family.
Yeah. Well, but what I also hear in what you're saying is an attribute that you would expect of an agency and probably most relationships is a deep sense of empathy. Yeah. And empathy in the idea of understanding your operating reality and what, for example, in the business, particularly, what's happening and not trying to force fit something that doesn't work for you and your brand and your company and your goals and your mission, or even interpersonally, like to your point about values and family values. So it sounds like empathy is key for you in those relationships.
Yeah, absolutely. And the ability of the agency as well to pass on capability and knowledge. We also, as an organization, need to be growing individuals inside the organization. And some of the positions, we insource some of our activities and we discuss we outsource others. It's really important that an agency partner can play an important role in the career development and personal development of every single person in my team as well, in that skills and knowledge transfer.
Yeah.
But it's not just about the job in hand or the outputs that we need to deliver. It's making sure the inputs are long-standing and continue to have benefit.
Yeah, I mean, make us smarter, make us better as a team versus just do your work and move on. I mean, it's partially helping make, first question is, how do you show the value of marketing to the rest of the organization? We talked a little bit about that, but how do you you mentioned sort of the being very focused on sales and numbers, but how else do you do that?
Well, we start from the commercial side, actually, Joe. So my team spends an awful lot of time, everything we do is measured. Let's start there.
Yeah.
And then we spend an awful lot of time internally pulling together the results of anywhere between 60 and 100 campaigns that we deliver annually, and the performance of our loyalty program and our members. And we share those results quarterly. We have a quarterly performance call that goes out to the business. I lead that. and we share with every single member of our team and the regional directors in our group who are speaking to hotel members, hotel partners. We speak to every single member of our organization and help them understand what we have done, but what it means to them in their positions and looking after each of their respective stakeholder groups. We have 3 sets of customers. We have our member properties. We have 750 hotels in 85 countries. We have the travel trade globally in all segments. And then we have the end consumer who is physically sleeping in the bedroom, dining in the restaurants. So when we present those results, we are making sure that they are benefit-led in terms of how they're delivered to everybody, and that they can then, everyone can interpret and use that information to explain to their various stakeholder groups what our marketing function and what our brand is doing, has been able to achieve, and will continue to do going forward. So that I think we have to start there. We collaborate very closely with many disciplines. Our role is to make sure that when our sales team go out to either make their calls in person or right now to conduct their trade shows, road shows, or their business meetings, that they look great when they do that.
Yeah.
So everything, all the materials that they use have to be the best they can possibly be. We need to be proud of the work that we deliver, and our internal customers need to be proud of the tools that we give them so that they can be successful with what they do. The same is true of our events team. So we typically host over 200 events a year. Now that we are delivering those via virtual means, just like you and I speaking today, we need to ensure that we've got all the right visual assets. We are touching our audiences more than we ever have done through email, social means, obviously these sorts of conversations online, and then also sort of education. We spend an awful lot of time internally as a function educating our colleagues in the business on what we do, because as we all appreciate, marketing has changed quite significantly over the years, and we do that through bite-sized chunks. So this week we're going to be, actually next week we're going to be focusing on the marketing life cycle, of the loyalty marketing life cycle of our members within the IPFER program. And that will be a 30-minute power session that will be delivered to all hands through a webinar, and then supported with those resources for people to follow up later on. We have brown bag series, we do our lunchtime educational seminars. I think there's various different ways you can demonstrate the value you bring to the business. It has to start with the dollars and the profitability. And if you can show that the work that you do has a meaningful impact on every single stakeholder inside and outside the organization, then the ears are open and people are then ready to listen to everything else that you have to say.
I love that. And I definitely heard that a large piece of this is sales enablement and kind of equipping the sales team to do their job. I once had my cousin, who's very, very smart and graduated from the Cornell Hotel Management School. So he's a hotel guy, once told me that marketing was like carpet bombing and sales is like hand-to-hand combat, which wasn't a particularly compelling argument to go into marketing, but I understand the idea of you're equipping them with the right tools to be able to deliver what they need to deliver from a sales perspective.
100%, and making sure that the brand is supported, because whether it's the way we portray ourselves when somebody goes into a sales meeting, Joe, how they conduct themselves, the notepad they use, the pen that they write with, it's all about branding and positioning. Again, I'm going to point to this here, our brand promise. I usually wear a t-shirt that says "Believe in Travel,"
right? And
it's a black shirt, and I thought, well, I'll be just,
you look invisible in this setting,
floating in the screen if I do that. But you in times even right now where we have reduced budgets, we're all having to think about other ways to walk the talk, deliver the message, and make sure we still do that with the same level of elegance, refinement, professionalism, decorum. And I think it's so important to make sure that the golden threads of the brand touch touch everything we do. And that's the good that's coming out of the pandemic, is that we as organizations are having to collaborate more and knit together more. And I believe that the golden threads will be stronger on the other side of this. And I do hope that those behaviors will continue into the future as well. Yeah, we have to be proud of everything we put out there, and that starts with ourselves through to what we create.
I love it. Okay, so I have some fun questions for you that are off the wall. Are you ready?
Okay, yeah, go for it.
The first is just, what is a quote or a book or a movie or a band that inspires you?
Oh, this is quite tough, because I have a lot of people that inspire me. Seth Godin, we've already talked about Sergio.
Well, I didn't say people. I said quote, book,
all
movie,
quotes.
Quote, movie, book,
true.
or print.
I think movie, is that A Beautiful Mind? Is that,
oh, yeah.
very inspiring. I just think there was a depth to that movie that probably touched so many people in so many ways. And I know I fell into it. And it struck me right at my core. And musically, I've always, this dates me. This is going to date me horribly.
Oh, fair enough.
But I do really, really enjoy The Cure.
I love them.
As the musical genre, but I still today listen to their music. It can be somewhat peppy. There is also a dark side to it. I think it was a leader in its day in terms
you have to pair The Cure and the Smiths.
I love the
super
Smiths
dark,
too.
Right? And they have to both be British for you, right?
Yes, absolutely. They really did bring. I think that they drove a new genre of music, and I think it was so out there. I look back now and I think, gosh, I remember my parents, and Smith's another one, but I remember my parents saying, it's ridiculous, not even music. How can that be music? And then, of course, we had Smithy turn up from the Smiths with a tree coming out of his pocket. And we were starting to see, I think, at that point in time, how, coming back to how people present themselves, how those bands were using their physical self as much as the music that they made.
Absolutely.
To bring their message to life. Anyway, so
I have a modern, I have a newer band that to me maybe carries the torch and mantle from the Smiths and the Cure, and that's the band The National. I don't know if you spent time with them, but you should spend some time with them. I think you'll find them. They have the dark and the light, and they certainly use their physical appearance as part of the show. But musically they're solid too. So that's fine. The National inspires me. All right. And so this is another one. What's a brand outside of maybe travel and hospitality that you really admire, and why do you admire them?
Again, I'm sort of very taken with many brands. Outside of hospitality that would strike me, I'm going to go for automotive. Okay, and I am going to pick Tesla because I think that they've done a great job of coming into an industry at the luxury end, even though the price point isn't actually
not outrageous. Yeah.
They really tipped it. They literally tipped it on its head.
Yeah.
They created it. The product is beautiful.
Yeah.
There is a movement behind them. The consumers that buy their product are in love with the brand as much as the vehicles and the product that they sell.
Yes.
I think that obviously Elon Musk stands for so much more than just an automotive manufacturer.
Right.
So the mission of Tesla and him is tied to something far more important for our planet and for our life in general. And because he's part of an ecosystem of innovation and big thinking. So when I think about a brand like Tesla, I'm not really seeing them as an everyday consumer driving the car, but I see the bigger picture of what they are trying to achieve. And I think that their execution of that has been really nicely done. I mean, obviously, he is a character.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'd want to be in PR inside that organization necessarily, but everything about it feels good.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Okay, so I have one more final silly question for you. In which fictional story or realm would you most like to live? So I'll go ahead and share that recently I went and watched the entire Star Wars saga with my kids, all 9 movies. Yep. And that would be fun and interesting. So I don't know if there's a fictional land or realm that you live in, what would it be and why?
I have to admit, I'm also a sci-fi fanatic. I grew up with Battlestar Galactica rather, and Star Wars, and in the UK it was Blake 7. I don't know if you ever heard of Blake 7. And that very much shaped who I am today. There was even a series, do you remember a series called V? I don't know if I can do it anymore now. I can't do it, but yeah, that they used to do the sign. Yeah. And it wasn't the Star Wars one, it was actually a series called V.
Right, but this was also the Vulcan salute for the original Star Trek, right?
Yeah.
And Mork and Mindy here in the US, Robin Williams.
No. Yeah. So I've always been a big sci-fi fan, but more recently, I have to admit that I've been drawn into the world of vampires. I do not know what we would describe that world as, but with
kind of Victorian, maybe a little bit.
The older interpretation of that, absolutely. There's many love stories that are associated to vampires and that world that the entertainment industry have done a great job teasing through. And that's a public admission. I don't think I've ever told anybody that. So you heard it here.
Breaking news. Kristie Goshow from Preferred Hotels wants to live in the age of vampires.
Yeah, but they have amazing powers, do they not? And,
they do.
Manage to enjoy very long lives, and they see a lot. It's not always bad. We have to look at the good.
Well, we already know that you have superhuman hearing and the power of invisibility. Not invisibility, but seeing through, seeing things that aren't visible.
Stated, yes.
So I mean, I just, when we see each other in person, I'll be sure to eat a very large meal of garlic the night before, just in case.
Probably advisable. What about you, Joe? If I've disclosed my deepest, darkest secret, what's yours?
I don't know. I do think the era of Star Wars to me is so exciting because I like the larger. I mean, many know that it's democracy versus authoritarianism, and it's a larger story, and it very much mirrors the sort of lead up to World War II. But most people don't think about that aspect. They think it's a cool shoot 'em up kind of thing. But I love the concept of the rebel and the band of misfits that come together to affect change in the world. And it sort of mirrors some of what we're seeing in the news today, I think, in some ways. And so I think it would be very exciting to live in a time and place where people come together for the betterment of the galaxy, or multiple galaxies in this case. I also thought it was always fascinating to me that at the beginning of each of the Star Wars movies, it says in a long time ago in a galaxy far away. It's not the future, it's a long time ago. And so the whole concept that all of these things with laser shooters and rockets and ships and things were actually a long time ago in a galaxy far away.
Right.
So
yes, that's a great observation. My current viewing after the kids have gone to bed right now, is Roswell. So that ties in very nicely with what you're saying there, because obviously that goes back to the 40s, the late 40s.
So I don't know. I'm intrigued by the concept that, you know, somebody else far, far away invented laser beams and rocket ships and communications and light speed travel a long time ago and far, 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 far away. But the idea of that is intriguing to me, that there's something else out there. Maybe I do truly believe in alien life.
Well, maybe you found somebody who's aligned with that thinking there. I share this with you actually before we part ways. That I was in I got engaged in Egypt on the Nile, and during that trip we took time to go and see the pyramids.
Yeah.
And we went down the very tight pathways down into the earth that you can't imagine how people back in the day were able to go down that far without the equipment that we have now. We went into chambers that were perfect. And I stood in one of these chambers and turned to my then fiance and said, they must have had a plumb line or something, because the walls, the ceiling, everything about these chambers is perfect. And we are so far down into the earth. And I looked at him and I said, I cannot accept that the humans on this planet back in that time were able to do this.
Yeah.
I find it difficult to accept. So that was my moment where I went, oh, maybe.
Well, I'm naturally very much of a skeptic. That's just part of that's part of who I am. But there are definitely things that in this world that are unexplainable.
I would agree. And maybe we're not supposed to explain them. We just have to go with it.
It's okay to accept some things just aren't explainable. It's okay.
Yeah. 100%.
Excellent. Well, Kristie, this has been an amazing conversation. Thank you so much for the time. And I'm excited for the rest of the world to hear this conversation as well. So thank you so much.